It began on a Saturday morning when the homeowner finally decided to tackle a project that had been sitting in his mind for years: the garage, long neglected and cluttered with forgotten tools, dusty boxes, and the odds and ends of suburban life, was ready for transformation. It wasn't about extravagance. He wasn't building a nightclub, a business, or anything disruptive. He wanted a functional space, organized shelves, a sturdy workbench, fresh flooring, and maybe, if time allowed, a small corner for hobbies. The first step was clearing it out. Over the course of several days, he hauled items to the curb for pickup, donated old furniture, and neatly stacked what he wanted to keep. By the end of the week, the once chaotic space had opened into a blank canvas. Soon after, a delivery truck arrived, dropping off supplies: wood for shelving, paint for the walls, and a few tools he had been meaning to buy. The sense of progress was energizing. Neighbors walking by often slowed to peek at the project. Some waved. Others stopped to compliment the effort. It wasn't unusual in the neighborhood for residents to work on their homes. People repainted fences, planted gardens, even renovated kitchens. The garage project seemed no different. But as is often the case in HOA-governed communities, what seemed harmless to one person was a lightning rod for another. A week into the project, as the homeowner stood back admiring his fresh coat of paint, he noticed a letter tucked neatly into his mailbox. The sight of the whole logo made his chest tighten. He unfolded it and scanned the page. What he read was infuriating. According to the HOA, his garage project was a violation of community covenants. They claimed that he had not sought prior approval for structural modifications and was therefore subject to fines until he halted all work and submitted a formal request. The wording was cold and officious, citing bylaw numbers and threatening penalties. The homeowner knew immediately that this was overreach. He wasn't altering the structure. He hadn't expanded the footprint, torn down walls, or built an addition. He was cleaning, painting, and installing shelves, basic upkeep. Well within his rights as a property owner, but the HOA didn't see it that way. To them, any improvement not filtered through their committees was a chance to flex their authority. Frustration burned in him as he read the letter again. It wasn't about the garage at all. This was about control. He could comply, halt the project, and grovel for permission, or he could push back. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't just about his garage. It was about the pattern of intimidation the HOA had inflicted on the entire community for years. He had heard the stories. A family fined for planting flowers outside the approved color scheme. An elderly couple cited for leaving their trash can at the curb for an extra day. Parents warned about sidewalk chalk drawings their children had made. Each story had seemed absurd, but most residents complied quietly, afraid of escalating fines or legal threats. The HOA thrived on that fear, using it to keep the neighborhood tightly under their thumb. But this time, the homeowner wasn't willing to bow his head. He saw the letter for what it was: a bluff designed to scare him into compliance. And as he stood in the middle of his freshly painted garage, an idea began to form. If the HOA wanted to play games, he would play better. If they wanted to nitpick projects, he would scrutinize their actions. If they wanted to fine him for a garage renovation, he would expose every hypocrisy, every hidden deal, and every misuse of power they had buried beneath their smug authority. The garage project had started as a personal improvement, but now it had transformed into something bigger. It was no longer about paint, shelves, or tools. It was about standing up to an overreaching board that believed they were untouchable, and the homeowner, fueled by both anger and determination, was ready to turn the tables. The first step would be research. He needed to know the bylaws better than the board itself. He needed to dig through records, meeting minutes, and financial reports. He needed to understand how the HOA really operated and where their weaknesses were buried. The letter on his workbench was supposed to be a warning. Instead, it became the spark that would ignite a battle the HOA never saw coming. The letter from the HOA never left the homeowner's workbench. It sat there like a reminder of what he was up against, its officious tone practically daring him to push back. And that's exactly what he intended to do. The garage project might have been the spark, But the fire that now burned in him demanded something more: answers. He started with the HOA bylaws. Every homeowner had received a copy when moving in, but most residents stuffed them into drawers, rarely revisiting the dense packet of legal jargon. He pulled out his own copy, dusted it off, and began reading it line by line. What he found was exactly what he suspected. There was nothing in the rules that prohibited painting, organizing, or renovating the inside of a garage. The board's claim about structural modifications was flimsy at best, more of a stretch than a solid argument. Already, he had proof they were bluffing. But that wasn't enough. He wanted to know why the HOA felt so emboldened to send threats over something so minor. That curiosity drove him deeper. He began attending board meetings, not to speak, but to listen. He sat quietly in the back of the clubhouse, notebook in hand, observing the way the board members carried themselves. It didn't take long to see the pattern. Decisions were made behind closed doors, discussions were vague, and financial reports were glossed over with little explanation. Residents who asked too many questions were brushed aside. At one meeting, he noticed something that didn't sit right. The treasurer read out a budget line item for community maintenance, but when questioned by a neighbor, gave only a curt response before moving on. Another time, the board approved a landscaping contract without even revealing the bidding process. It was as if transparency wasn't just avoided, it was deliberately hidden. His suspicions grew. He began requesting records, something every homeowner was entitled to do. At first, the HOA stalled, sending him copies of generic budgets that revealed little. But he persisted, filing written requests and citing state statutes that required HOA letters to disclose their financial records to residents. Eventually, he got his hands on more detailed reports. And that's when the inconsistencies started to surface. Large sums of money were listed under vague categories like community improvements and operational expenses, but no specifics were provided. He cross-referenced these with meeting minutes and found discrepancies. The board claimed to have paid for new security cameras, but no cameras were ever installed. They cited landscaping upgrades. Yet the neighborhood's grass looked as neglected as ever. It became clear that money was moving, but not where they said it was going. The homeowner also began talking to his neighbors. Over coffee, at the mailbox, during casual walks, he asked subtle questions about their experiences with the HOA. The stories were all too familiar. Residents had been fined for trivial issues. But when they asked where their money was going, they received no clear answers. Some had even suspected the board was pocketing funds, but no one had dared to dig deeper. The more he learned, the angrier he became. This wasn't just about him anymore. The garage project fine was nothing compared to what he now suspected: misuse of community funds, shady deals, and a board that treated the HOA like their personal piggy bank. To confirm his suspicions, he decided to dig further. He visited the county clerk's office to search for contracts the HOA had filed. There, in dusty records and public filings, he uncovered the first real proof. Some of the contractors listed in HOA budgets were tied to family members of board members. Landscaping invoices were signed off by the HOA president's cousin. Repair contracts went to a company registered under the treasurer's brother's name. It was all starting to fit together. The HOA wasn't just nitpicking rules for the sake of power. They were using fines and intimidation as a way to funnel money into their own pockets. Every citation, every bogus violation, was another chance to squeeze money out of homeowners to fund their scheme. Sitting back in his garage one evening, surrounded by half-finished shelves and paint cans, the homeowner realized just how big this had become. What had started as a personal annoyance was quickly transforming into a mission. The whole board wasn't just corrupt, they were careless, and now he had the knowledge, the records, and the determination to expose them. But exposure would require more than suspicion. He needed to build a case so airtight that the board couldn't wriggle out of it. That meant gathering more evidence, keeping meticulous records, and finding a way to bring it all into the light. As he locked up the garage that night, he glanced at the letter still pinned to the workbench. The board had wanted to scare him into silence. Instead, they had given him the reason and the resolve to uncover every secret they had tried so hard to bury. And he wasn't planning to stop until everyone in the neighborhood knew the truth. With suspicions confirmed and inconsistencies documented, the homeowner realized that this was no longer just a personal battle, it was a mission to expose the HOA's corruption. The first step was meticulous planning. Every action, every observation had to be recorded. Any misstep could be used against him. He needed irrefutable proof, not just anecdotes. He began by installing security cameras in strategic locations around his property. These weren't for the garage itself, but for monitoring board members and contractors who came and went under the guise of HOA business. Hidden angles captured deliveries, meetings, and interactions that could reveal patterns of favoritism or fraud. Every package, every signature, every conversation on the porch was documented, creating a growing archive of material. Next, he delved deeper into financial records. Every invoice he had obtained was scrutinized line by line. He matched contractor names, dates, and amounts against public filings and tax records. The results were glaring. Payments had been made for work that never occurred. Companies connected to board members received multiple contracts without competitive bidding. Some invoices were recycled from previous years, padded to include extra charges. It was clear that the HOA had been systematically misusing funds for months, if not years. To corroborate these findings, he quietly reached out to neighbors. Many were hesitant at first, fearful of retaliation, but he approached them subtly, listening to their experiences without revealing the full scope of his plan. One by one, their stories aligned with what he had already uncovered: fines issued for minor infractions, payments requested for services never rendered, and board members showing blatant favoritism toward friends and family. These first-hand accounts strengthened his growing dossier. The homeowner also began tracking meetings more closely. He attended every board meeting, taking copious notes and discreetly recording key moments. He observed who spoke, who voted, and who seemed to influence decisions behind the scenes. Patterns emerged. Decisions were often unanimous, not because of consensus, but because questions were brushed aside or dissenting voices intimidated. The whole relied on the quiet majority's fear to maintain control. Meanwhile, the garage project continued to serve as both a cover and a symbol. While he organized shelves and painted walls, he documented every stage of construction. Photos, timestamps, and receipts were compiled into a chronological record that demonstrated he had acted within legal bounds. This was crucial. The HOA's initial fine was predicated on claiming he had violated structural rules by maintaining a perfect record. He neutralized that angle. He also discovered digital correspondence that raised eyebrows. Emails between board members and contractors revealed that some projects were approved without full disclosure to homeowners, and in some cases, funds were diverted to personal accounts before payments were officially processed. By cross-referencing email timestamps with invoices and bank filings, he created a timeline that exposed both the method and the motive behind the misconduct. The homeowner understood that exposing this wouldn't be enough. He needed a strategy. He couldn't simply confront the board in a meeting. They would deny everything, hide behind bylaws, and intimidate residents. He needed a calculated approach: legal documentation, irrefutable evidence, and a method to ensure the community saw the truth without putting himself or others at risk. To that end, he began organizing the information into categories: financial mismanagement, procedural violations, favoritism, and harassment of residents. Each category contained detailed evidence: scanned documents, photos, recorded meetings, and witness accounts. The pile grew into a dossier so comprehensive that it could withstand scrutiny from auditors, attorneys, or even the county. Meanwhile, the board grew restless. They noticed his increased presence at meetings, the cameras installed on his property, and the way neighbors subtly lingered during discussions. Their emails became more aggressive, demanding explanations for the garage project and citing further fines, but the homeowner remained calm. He knew they were panicking. Panic led to mistakes, and he had been waiting for precisely that. One afternoon, he made a breakthrough by cross-referencing meeting minutes with public records. He identified a pattern of fraudulent contract approvals. Certain contractors were repeatedly awarded work without bids, and payment records showed overcharges that lined the pockets of specific board members. This was the smoking gun, the concrete proof needed to expose them publicly. With the dossier nearly complete, he began formulating the next stage of the plan. It wouldn't be subtle. Subtlety had failed to yield results against such a brazen board. Instead, he would present the evidence in a way that could not be ignored, carefully, methodically, and in full view of the community. The garage project, once a minor home improvement, had become the launching pad for an expose that would shake the HOA to its core. By the end of the month, he had everything ready: documented violations, witness statements, invoices, recordings, and a clear timeline of misconduct. He reviewed it all meticulously, making sure each piece of evidence was airtight. One slip, one missing receipt, and the board could claim misrepresentation. But this dossier was perfect. It told the story clearly, leaving no room for doubt. The homeowner knew that the next step would change the dynamics of the neighborhood forever. The board, overconfident and corrupt, had underestimated him. They believed fear could control the community. But armed with proof and supported quietly by neighbors, he was ready to expose them and reclaim not just his garage, but the integrity of the neighborhood itself. The homeowner's plan was simple in concept but required perfect timing. He had built a dossier too strong to ignore, yet presenting it recklessly could backfire. He needed a setting where the community could witness the truth firsthand, without the board being able to manipulate the narrative. That meant a neighborhood meeting, but one where he controlled the evidence and the flow of information. He began by quietly alerting neighbors to attend the next HOA meeting, hinting at revelations that would affect the entire community. Attendance was modest at first, but curiosity spread quickly. On the day of the meeting, the room was packed with residents, many who had previously been silent, now emboldened by the promise of transparency. Cameras were discreetly set up to document proceedings, and notes were prepared to ensure nothing was missed. The board opened the meeting, as usual, with their formalities and scripted agenda. But the homeowner had been prepared for their tactics. While they read aloud from prepared statements, he discreetly circulated a summary of key findings to attending residents: the mismatched invoices, the favoritism toward contractors connected to board members, and the pattern of arbitrary fines. Whispered conversations filled the room as attendees began connecting the dots. When it was his turn to present, he methodically laid out the evidence. First came the financial records. He displayed invoices showing overcharges and payments to contractors with clear connections to board members' families. He highlighted contracts that had been approved without competitive bidding and cross-referenced them with meeting minutes to prove procedural violations. The room was silent, punctuated only by murmurs of recognition. Next, he revealed documented cases of harassment. Letters and emails were shown, demonstrating how fines had been used to intimidate residents for minor infractions, some even citing work done within HOA approved standards. Neighbors gasped as they read accounts of fines for flower beds, trash cans, and decorative flags. The patterns were undeniable, the behavior systematic. The homeowner then presented video and photographic evidence. Clips from his security cameras and photos from public records corroborated his claims. Board members were caught discussing contracts privately, bypassing formal procedures. Receipts and bank statements showed payments that contradicted public records. Each piece of evidence reinforced the next, building a narrative that could not be dismissed as rumor or misunderstanding. Residents began to whisper among themselves. Faces that had been tense and cautious shifted to expressions of outrage. People realized they were not alone. The board's pattern of corruption had affected nearly everyone in some way. Murmurs turned to questions, and questions to statements of support for the homeowner. The board attempted to respond, citing bylaws and claiming the homeowner had misinterpreted the rules. But their words fell flat against the meticulous documentation he had presented. Every defense was countered by irrefutable evidence. When they tried to shift blame or downplay findings, residents called them out. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. By the end of the meeting, the room was buzzing. The whole board members, once confident and authoritative, appeared flustered and defensive. They had underestimated the homeowner, underestimated the neighbors, and underestimated the consequences of hiding corruption under the guise of authority. The community had seen the truth laid bare. Following the meeting, whispers turned into action. Residents began demanding accountability. Requests for independent audits were submitted. Some board members resigned under pressure, while others faced calls for removal. The homeowner had not only defended himself from an unjust fine but had sparked a reckoning that threatened to dismantle years of mismanagement and abuse of power. The garage, once a simple improvement project, now stood as a symbol. Every freshly painted wall, every organized shelf, and every piece of evidence stored neatly in folders represented persistence, research, and courage. It was no longer just a garage, it was the command center for transparency and neighborhood justice. As the HOA reeled from the exposure, the homeowner realized something vital. The fight had been won not with anger, but with strategy, evidence, and patience. And though the board still clung to remnants of authority, their power had been forever undermined by the truth. The community, now aware of the extent of the corruption, began to unite. Meetings were no longer about enforcing petty rules, they became forums for accountability. Residents began to participate actively, asking questions, requesting documentation, and ensuring that future decisions were transparent. The homeowner had sparked not just a revelation, but a movement, a collective awakening to the power dynamics that had controlled their lives for too long. The fallout from the meeting was immediate and intense. The whole board, blindsided by the exposure, attempted a desperate counterattack. Letters were sent to residents disputing the homeowner's claims, emphasizing misinterpretations and personal vendettas. They threatened legal action against anyone who shared evidence publicly, attempting to intimidate the community into silence. But the homeowner and his allies were ready. Every letter, every threat, every intimidation attempt was documented. The homeowner had anticipated the possibility of retaliation. He maintained a digital archive of all communications, emails, letters, and notices, ensuring that any attempts by the board to suppress evidence could itself become proof of harassment. This meticulous record-keeping turned the board's threats into ammunition for the community, further undermining their credibility. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to organize. Residents held informal meetings, discussing their experiences and coordinating responses to future HOA attempts at intimidation. They shared documentation, tips, and advice on how to navigate the HOA's legal threats. The homeowner became a quiet leader, not through force or charisma, but by providing clarity and strategy. His evidence was now the backbone of collective action. The board tried to escalate through procedural loopholes. They filed notices citing unrelated infractions, hoping to distract and overwhelm the homeowner. Trash cans allegedly left too long, minor landscaping errors, and outdated permit claims were suddenly scrutinized. But he had prepared for this, with timestamps, receipts, and photos documenting every action. He could refute every accusation. Each failed attempt to intimidate him further weakened the board's standing in the eyes of the community. Frustration and panic among the board members became evident. Their emails grew frantic, meeting notes defensive, and public statements increasingly erratic. Residents, however, were emboldened. With the homeowner's guidance, they began attending meetings in larger numbers, asking pointed questions, and demanding transparency. The previously unquestioned authority of the board eroded with every inquiry. The homeowner also began leveraging public oversight. County offices, already aware of his documentation, were consulted for guidance on HOA compliance and resident rights. County representatives provided clarity that reinforced the homeowner's position. While the HOA had some power to enforce community rules, they could not bypass state laws, financial regulations, or federal guidelines for private property rights. This information became another weapon in the neighborhood's arsenal. Meanwhile, the garage itself became a symbol of resistance. Residents passing by noticed the changes. Every organized shelf, every painted surface, every neatly labeled box was a testament to patience, preparation, and persistence. It wasn't just a workspace, it was a visual reminder that one homeowner, armed with knowledge and determination, could challenge a system long perceived as unassailable. The board attempted one final maneuver, a special meeting intended to vote on removing the homeowner from the HOA entirely or imposing maximum fines. But the community, now united and vigilant, turned up in force. They scrutinized every proposal, demanded evidence for every claim, and voted with overwhelming authority to nullify the board's punitive measures. The attempt failed spectacularly, leaving the board humiliated and exposed. By the end of this phase, the HOA's power had been irreversibly weakened. Residents were no longer intimidated by threats or fines. They had seen, documented, and confronted the truth. The homeowner's project, the garage that had triggered the initial conflict, was no longer just about organization or improvement. It had become the rallying point for transparency, accountability, and community empowerment. The homeowner understood the significance of what had occurred by remaining calm, methodical, and strategic. He had turned a personal grievance into a broader movement. The board's attempts at retaliation had failed, their authority diminished, and their reputation forever tarnished. The neighborhood, once passive and fearful, had found its voice. And it was a voice that could not be silenced. The final chapter of the HOA saga unfolded with a quiet intensity. The board, now stripped of credibility and authority, attempted to salvage what little influence remained. Their last-minute proposals, desperate threats, and hurried meetings did little more than highlight their incompetence and corruption. Residents had seen through every tactic, every manipulation, and every attempt to intimidate them. The balance of power had shifted permanently. In the weeks that followed, several board members resigned. Their departures were not voluntary gestures of humility but consequences of exposure and community pressure. New elections were scheduled, and for the first time in years, residents exercised their right to choose representatives who were accountable and transparent. The elections brought in members committed to fairness, adherence to bylaws, and responsible financial oversight. The era of unchecked authority was over. The homeowner's garage, which had started as a simple personal project, now stood as a symbol of this transformation. Every shelf, every painted wall, and every neatly arranged tool became more than just a workspace. It was a testament to perseverance, strategy, and courage in the face of intimidation. Residents frequently passed by, acknowledging the effort with nods, smiles, or even small waves of solidarity. It had become a landmark, the centerpiece of a community awakened to its own power. The neighborhood itself began to change. Meetings were no longer formalities where decisions were dictated from the front table. Instead, they became forums for discussion, accountability, and collaboration. Residents actively participated, asking questions, reviewing budgets, and ensuring transparency in every HOA decision. The culture of fear and submission was replaced by one of vigilance and involvement. Even the former board members learned a hard lesson. Their attempts at retaliation, intimidation, and financial manipulation had failed spectacularly. They became examples of what happens when power is abused in a system meant to serve the community rather than exploit it. Their legacy, if it could be called that, was a cautionary tale. Authority without accountability leads only to collapse. The homeowner, for his part, did not bask in victory or seek recognition. The triumph was quiet but profound. By combining careful observation, methodical documentation, and strategic action, he had not only defended himself from an unjust fine but had sparked a transformation that empowered every resident in the neighborhood. His actions demonstrated that one determined individual, armed with knowledge and persistence, could challenge even the most entrenched power structures. As months passed, the neighborhood stabilized under the new, accountable leadership. Minor disputes were handled fairly, rules were applied consistently, and financial transparency became the norm. The garage, fully completed and immaculately organized, remained untouched by further conflict, a living reminder of the events that had reshaped the community. The homeowner often reflected on how a simple project had escalated into such a monumental struggle. It had started with paint, shelves, and organization, but had evolved into a fight for justice, transparency, and integrity. The experience had taught him and the entire neighborhood a vital lesson. Vigilance, courage, and preparation are the tools that protect a community from abuse of power. In the end, the HOA's attempt to fine him for a garage project backfired completely. Instead of suppressing his efforts, it inspired him to uncover the board's secrets, rally the community, and ultimately transform the neighborhood into a place governed by fairness rather than fear. The homeowner's victory was not just personal, it was collective. And so, in a quiet suburban street, the garage stood finished, the tools neatly arranged, the walls freshly painted, and the shelves perfectly organized. It was a workspace, a symbol, and a testament to what happens when courage meets preparation. The neighborhood once subdued by fear had been awakened, and the HOA's overreach became a story whispered through fences and driveways for years to come, a reminder that truth, evidence, and determination can topple even the most powerful of boards.